Right, so yeah, welcome everybody. I'd like to introduce Haiping from University of Sheffield, who's been doing a lot of work about how to apply machine learning techniques and kind of the powers that we have today to our scientific problems. Welcome, Haiping.
Yes, thank you, Greg, and thank everybody who joined us at this time. So today, I'm very pleased to share our recent work on deployment-centric generative and multimodal AI for scientific discovery. And this is based on our recent perspective published in Nature Machine Intelligence. I will talk about the framework first. And recently, we published a perspective called Towards Deployment-Centric Multimodal AI Beyond Vision and Language. Firstly, let's see some data. Here are the pairwise, that means bimodal papers preprint on arXiv from 2019 to 2024. We can see that the modality of vision and language has grown significantly over the past few years with the popularity of ChatGPT and other foundation models. But the other modalities are relatively less studied. If we look at only 2024, this pie chart is from 2024, all the arXiv papers with two modalities, we can see that vision and language papers account for about half of all the papers on arXiv. And if we consider either vision or language, then altogether vision and others, and the language and others altogether, they account for 88.9% of all the papers. So we can see that most of the multimodal works are focused on vision and language. That is why it motivated us to write this perspective to explore multimodal AI beyond vision and language. So if we look closer, look at non-vision and language modalities, and it's even more surprising because if we do not consider vision and language, we look at the combination of modalities, either pairwise or more than two modalities, we can see actually there are very few papers study the combination of other modalities. With a time series and sensor are the most popular, most abundant one, but only with 23 papers. And this is also maybe because sensors are mostly time series, so there may be some correlation over there. But other modality combinations are very rarely studied in the literature. So this has motivated us to look at modality beyond those very popular modalities, such as vision and language. When we work in multimodal AI and when we talk to people, we find majority of people, when they talk about multimodal AI, actually they're talking about multimedia AI, where they only consider image, text, and audio. But in fact, multimodal AI, if we view it in a very broad definition as any two or more type of data, then it can include other modalities such as graphs, social networks, spatial data, DNA sequences, stock markets, and tabular data. It can be very broad. Therefore, the scope of multimodal AI is much broader than just multimedia AI. So it's interesting when I talk to many people asking them to join our community, saying that join our multimodal AI committee, they said, okay, I don't work on multimodal AI. Then I ask, what do you work on? Then they say, oh, I work on sequences, I work on structured spatial. I say, that is actually multimodal AI. So you are part of the multimodal AI community. So therefore, our definition and our view of multimodal AI is very broad, and it goes beyond just vision and language. So in terms of generative AI, which is very popular now, but it is actually a concept of decades old. And it's a classic textbook topic of generative AI. There's a very nice illustration on Wikipedia. So generative AI, generative neural network, is in contrast with discriminative learning, where discriminative neural networks is given an image. You want to tell what describes this image as one of the categories. For example, is a cat. And for generative AI or neural networks, is that you give a description, and the neural network will generate the data as the output. So it's the opposite of discriminative neural networks. And the reason generative AI become so popular now is because it has been greatly empowered by the powerful foundation models, because previous generations of generative AI are interesting, but they are not so powerful because they still generate more non-realistic data than they do generate realistic data. So, but recent powerful foundation models has made the generative model much more powerful, and many of us have played with generative AI, where it can generate a very realistic and sometimes fascinating data, images, languages, papers, poems that become very, very popular. And still, we see more generative AI in the multimedia domain, where we have abundant data, we have very powerful foundation models. But for other modalities, there are relatively less research and less powerful foundation models, although we see more and more researchers working on other modalities for foundation models. So we will see more and more generative AI for other modalities as well. And so the relationship between generative and multimodal AI is that they are actually quite connected. In the past 2 years, when we bring the community together and work on this perspective paper, we have identified 5 key multimodal AI specific challenges. The first multimodal AI specific challenge is we call it modality incompleteness, where we have the modalities for some samples are completely missing. Some modalities are completely missing, either in training or in inference. So this is unique to multimodal AI, because if you have a single modality or you're missing it completely, you don't have the sample, so it doesn't impose a problem. But here, when we work with multimodal AI, if we have 3 modalities, but for some samples, if in the training you have only 1 or 2 modalities, how should we deal with this data? Should we just throw it away, or can we use it? So that is a multi-modality unique problem, where it's called modality incompleteness or missingness. And generative AI actually can be a very good solution for this problem, because generative AI can generate those data in those missing modalities. So the second multimodal specific challenge is multimodal heterogeneity, where data from multiple modalities can have very different characteristics. They can be of very different dimension, and they can be also very different quality. They can also be different nature. Some are time series data, some are spatial data. So they can be very different. Therefore, when we bring together this data, so one key challenge is how to deal with this heterogeneity. This is where generative AI may play a small part. For example, it can help to learn some intermediate modalities, or it can learn to transform one modality to the other and try to bridge the heterogeneity. The third challenge is cross-modality alignment. When we have data in multiple modalities, we may want to find the correspondence between different modalities. For example, the corresponding semantics, where we want to find out whether a particular part of one modality corresponding to which part of the other modality. And if it's temporal data, we want to find the correspondence between different modalities, which part of the modality corresponding to the same time point. So that is an alignment problem. And the generative AI can also help to deal with this challenge by learning the cross-modality representations. And this fourth challenge is modality complementarity. And later we will show that the definition of multimodal can be very broad. Therefore, if we have multiple modalities of data is available, the question is whether we should use all of them or just a few will actually be the best. So this is actually also can be viewed as a modality selection problem, where we are familiar with feature selection. So here, when we have more and more modalities available, one of the questions is whether we should select just a few of the modalities or whether we should use all, or maybe just one modality is enough for the task. So here, generative AI may also play a small part in try to learn the relationship between different modalities and also maybe combine or integrate some other modalities based on this learned representation and generative nature of the models. The fifth challenge is multimodal privacy risk. This is talking about when we have the need to protect the privacy of data. When we have a single modality, it's relatively easy. We can anonymize the data. But the problem is when you have multiple modalities of data, if individual modalities are anonymized, but when we put in pieces together, then we may be able to re-identify the subjects of this data. This is similar to the cases where police putting up multiple pieces of evidence in order to identify the criminal. So generative AI makes this also impose more risks because generated data may also reveal some of the private informations and confidential informations, and that will make the multimodal privacy risk problem more complex. So we can see that generative AI have a role to play in solving many of the multimodal AI specific challenges. And another aspect is that we see most academic research are actually model-centric. If we look at those papers published each year in top AI or machine learning conferences, majority of the papers are proposing a new model. And many of the newcomers to this area, actually they have a misconceptions in that, okay, in order to work in AI or machine learning, I have to propose a new model. Many students, when they start to work with me, they say, okay, Haiping, how can I create or propose a new model? They are very eager to create new models. But on the other hand, with the success of ChatGPT, we know that many of the technologies used to ChatGPT and the models are actually commonly used. What make a big difference is the data they fed in particularly high quality data. These have created increasing interest in data-centric AI, where the focus is not about the model, it's about how to get high quality data and in large samples so that we can feed in those very mature models so that we can get powerful models that can help us to complete the task we want. And while AI become more and more pervasive and become more and more influencing our real world life, there is also more and more attention has been paid to what we call deployment-centric AI, where we start to consider the deployment constraints and considerations and particularly end user needs more and more. For example, ethical considerations. We need to make sure the AI models we develop are ethical. And also, for example, in pandemic, we want models to have more like real-time performance. And we also know that some models, when we developed it, we didn't consider the user needs. And eventually we find that actually that's not what the end user wants. So this is basically a waste of our efforts. And therefore, we see there is quite an imbalance between the different workflows or themes of AI, where model-centric approach dominates. We want to create a more open, dynamic, and interdisciplinary ecosystem through our UK Open Multimodal AI network, so that we can achieve more balanced development of model-centric, data-centric, and deployment-centric AI. This is not to say that model-centric research is not important. They are still very, very important, but we are saying that we need to pay more attention or devote more efforts to data-centric and deployment-centric research. So through the past 2 years, we have developed this deployment-centric multimodal AI workflow, where the key is we will consider the deployment constraint much early after we define the problem. We want to consider the deployment constraints before we formulate the task, so that we can formulate a task that consider at least some of the deployment constraints. In other words, if we know that our solutions are not deployable, maybe we should devote our effort on something that is more deployable. And that is a key spirit of deployment-centric workflow. So you can see that here we illustrate the traditional model-centric approach, focusing on developing the model with standard data set. And in data-centric approach, we start to devote efforts in how to get the data and how to curate the data so that it can fit into our powerful models. And in order to do this deployment-centric workflow, we will need to engage stakeholders very early on and bring together experts in multiple disciplines to collaborate so that we can define and formulate the constraint properly to help us to formulate a more feasible task. And in terms of data modality, we'll also broaden the definition into very broad views, where at the top level, we look at multiple data types, for example, imaging data, health record, multiomics in the example of healthcare. But if we look at individual modality, we will also have subtypes. Because if we talk to a radiologist, we talk about multimodal, they will naturally think about multimodal as multiple imaging modalities rather than multiple modalities of imaging and the text and the other modalities. And we also know that there are a branch of AI is about multi-view learning. And we view this multi-view as also a special type of multimodality, because many of the problems and challenges and methodology used for multi-view learning can be applied to multimodal as well. We can have multiple views of a specific data subtype, and these can be viewed as multiple modalities, and they can provide complementary information as well. And even for a single view, a specific view, we will also have we can have multiple fidelities. For example, we can have very high fidelity data, we can have low fidelity data, and we can also have adaptive fidelity data. For example, for X-ray, I think recently the radiation in X-ray has been reduced because we use adaptive fidelity so that we have high fidelity at where it is important to get the details, and we use low fidelity where it is not so important. And in the paper, we studied 3 real-world use cases. And these are the 3 real-world use cases. We use pandemic response as a primary example to illustrate our work in deployment-centric workflow, where the key steps is to have the problem and consider the constraint, and then define our text within the solution space defined by the constraint. And after that, we can formulate a more practical and deployment-centric task so that we can develop our model, and so that when our model has been developed, it can be more deployable and be more feasible to do a real-world assessment of its constraints and its real-world practical value. So in the paper, we go through in details examples of the constraints that we will consider and the tasks that we can formulate, and the data we can consider for each of the 3 use cases. And you can refer to our paper for the details. And with that big framework of deployment-centric design, and now I will move on to give 2 examples of our recent works that embody some of the principles of deployment-centric design. The first work I want to share is called DrugBAN. It's called Interpretable Bilinear Attention Network with Domain Adaptation for drug discovery. And this is a drug target interaction prediction problem where our input is a drug and also a target, typically to be represented as a protein, a sequence of protein. And the problem is to predict whether the drug will bind or interact with a protein sequence. And we typically, this is a very biological drug discovery problem, but it is very similar to a recommender system, just like we shopping on Amazon, where Amazon will recommend a product to each of the customer or users. So the problem is quite similar. It's just to predict whether a particular drug will bind or interact with a particular sequence. And here, I will not go through the details, but we just use some simple graph convolutional neural networks to encode the drug so that each substructure will have a vector representation. And similarly, we will use a 1D convolutional neural network to encode the protein sequences so that each subsequence will have a vector representation. And after this encoding, drug will be represented as a matrix, and the protein will also be represented as a matrix. And then we model their bilinear interaction using a matrix. So basically, this is talking about the interaction between, for example, this vector and this vector will be the interaction captured over here. And we consider a multi-attention, multi-head attention, so that when they will have multiple type of interactions. And then we do a bilinear pooling to take the highways, and then this will for joint representation, and then we use a simple fully connected layer to do the prediction of the probability the drug will bind with a protein. And we use a existing domain adaptation network to improve the outer domain performance. So the focus here is not on the model, but on how we make the design more deployment-centric. And this is a collaboration with AstraZeneca. So at the start of our collaboration, our collaborator told me that Haiping don't tell us any of the results using random split, because firstly, it is too optimistic. You can get very good results using random split on many algorithms. Secondly, that is not what pharmaceutical company is interested. They are not interested in predicting something they already have, where the test data is very similar to their training data. What they want to discover is new drugs. And besides random split, there's a code split. That is to say that in the test data, none of the drug or the target has been seen in the training data. So that is none of the drugs and proteins in the test data has we have seen them in the training data, the interaction. So this is called code split. Therefore, as long as the drug and the target as the protein appear in the training sequence, we will not include them in the test sequence. So this is much more challenging than the random split, where you will see the protein and the drugs that you have seen in your training set. So we can see the performance drops, particularly for simple methods like SVM and random forest. But this is also not the most challenging case, because maybe in training I didn't see you, but maybe I have seen your siblings. I see your sisters, see your brothers, or maybe I see your parents, I see your children, and you share some similar characteristics. So although in the training I didn't see a particular drug or particular protein, but I see drugs and proteins similar to those drug and protein in the test set. That is also not the pharmaceutical companies want. They are not trying to discover similar drugs, that some drugs are already working. They want to discover new drugs that are different from those drugs that they are known. Therefore, we constructed this clustering-based cross-validation, where we cluster the drugs and cluster the proteins, so that we make sure that in the test set, we do the split by cluster, so that none of the drug and the protein in the training or target set belong to the same cluster. So that is, we do the clustering, and then we make sure that we split the data according to the cluster index. And this is much more challenging than the code split. And we can see that the performance of all the models has dropped. And we show that our methods performs the best, and also domain adaptation can help to improve the results. The moral of the story here is that deployment-centric design does change the conclusion, because in our early paper, we found that if you use different split, the conclusion can actually become the opposite. Because if we use a random split, A is better than B. But if you use clustering-based cross-validation, then B is better than A. So the conclusion can be totally opposite. It depends on what kind of validation or split you are using. So, and we are also very keen in making our methods, the software, to be very not just reproducible, but highly reusable. And our paper has been reused by other authors. It's not by us. In the reusability report published in Nature Machine Intelligence, and they have applied our approach to new data sets and the new tasks. These are the new data sets. They show that similar conclusions can be drawn on similar on other data sets, and they have also applied our methods to different problems, not drug target prediction, but cell line drug response, and also mutation drug association prediction, and show that it has similar conclusions. And our paper is only the 12th reusability report published in Nature Machine Intelligence when it was published. Now, of course, there are more. The second work I want to share with you is what we call mask prior guided denoising diffusion. We call MapDiff for inverse protein folding. This is a generative modeling problem, and it is a part of the de novo protein design. In de novo protein design, which is how David Baker was awarded the Nobel Prize last year, it starts with backbone generation. So this is a 3D structure generation. After generating the 3D structure, then you need to design the sequence. That is, given the 3D structure, we want to predict what are the sequences that can fold into that 3D structure. That's the second step. After we have the sequence, we can do computational filtering, for example, using AlphaFold to select the sequences. And then those selected sequences can be put through experimental characterization to see whether they indeed works. So this can help us to design proteins with a particular function for various applications, such as vaccine development or other kind of drug discovery. So the MapDiff we proposed using mask prior pre-training. This is basically a multimodal learning problem where we have the 3D backbone, that's a 3D structure modality, and we also have the sequence in the ground truth where we have paired 3D structure and sequence data for proteins. And what we do is similar to language modeling, where we mask, we mask part of the sequence, and then we train this mask sequence designer, this invariant point attention network, so that we can predict those masked amino acid successfully. So this is pre-training. So after this pre-training, the model have the capability of capturing the context of 3D structure and the sequence so that they can predict missing or masked residues or amino acid in the sequence. So another key component is we use this mask prior pre-training network to guide our denoising network. Denoising is given a noisy sequence. We want to clean it. We want to obtain a cleaned version of the sequence. So with conditions on a 3D backbone, that is, we know the structure we want, and we have a noisy sequence. We want to know what is the sequence that can help us generate that 3D structure. So what we do is that we use an equivalent graph neural network that can help us generate a 2D sequence, and then based on the structure data, and then we will use an entropy-based mask to identify which of the residues have lower confidence. That is, we think they are more noisy than others. Here we use a mask ratio adapter to control how many residues we will consider as uncertain or as low confidence. And then once we have this, it's quite similar to this problem. So we can use our pre-trained sequence designer to predict those residues that we have low confidence. So therefore, we expect after this prediction, we will have refined, improved predictions at those masked residues. So therefore, the
question
is similar to image generation, the diffusion model, where we have a diffusion process and we have a denoising process, and we iteratively go through this denoising and diffusion process to improve our sequence prediction. And so there are some details of acceleration. For example, we use the denoising diffusion implicit models to accelerate the generation, and also compare to the baselines of protein MPN. We generate the whole sequencing at once rather than token by token or residue by the residue. So that is a brief introduction to the model. And here is our comparison with the baseline. So this is David Baker's protein MPN published in Science. And this is a NeurIPS 2023, a paper, also a diffusion model, but we use autoregressive decoding. This is a evaluation of sequence recovery, and we show that our model can outperform the baselines in both perplexity, is how surprising you are in predicting the sequence, and also the recovery accuracy. So this is a traditional evaluation. And I want to show you what we have done on more deployment-centric design in the evaluation is, again, we consider a zero-shot generalization where we train our model on the path on one data set, and then we test the sequence generation on other data sets like PDB 2022 and TS15, so that we show that our model can have better zero-shot generalization. And we also study the foldability. And as we mentioned, sequence design, sequence prediction is a second step. Then the next step is using models like AlphaFold to predict the structure of 3D structure from the sequence. So after we're using AlphaFold to fold our predicted sequence, we can compare the refolded sequence against the ground truth sequence, so that we can have the metrics to see the foldability, how reliable and confident they are, and how much they deviate or they match the ground truth sequence. And again, we show that our model have much better foldability. So this is basically two examples, and we can see that generative and multimodal AI is advancing very fast, with many high-profile papers coming out for multimodal cancer treatment outcome prediction, multimodal generative AI for medical image interpretation, that is writing a radiology report, and the multimodal foundation models for molecular cell biology, and also generative AI in medicine. And in our, so after seeing these examples, we have bring together the community to discuss how to move forward, particularly for the community. And we have made several recommendations on how to have more deployment-centric development in achieving bigger impact for multimodal AI. And for example, safety, reliability, and interpretability are important. And one recommendation is that for those non-interpretable or complex outputs, we can translate those output into more accessible format, for example, text or vision format. And we can see that in many multimodal models, text or language serve as intermediate formats that can help to bridge different modalities. And for scalability and resource efficiency, and we need to have more scalable and resource efficient solutions, so that not only big tech like Google, Microsoft, Amazon can do the research, but institutional researchers with lower resources can also develop solutions for more applications that can leverage our recent advances. And we also need to consider the ethical compliance and user preparedness, so that it's important to include the end users in the design from right beginning. And in terms of data-centric and model-centric development, data scarcity is a key problem, particularly in domains beyond vision and language. And we need to have more open data sharing and standardization framework in place so that we can leverage data in related domains and of similar nature so that we can expand our data resources and balance the data representation. And we need to have more diversified data set development so that we can have more equitable databases built to reduce bias and enhance generatability. And we have mentioned the problem of multimodality selection. So I think more efforts need to be devoted in assessing multiple modalities available to see to give some guidelines for modality selection. And we will see more foundation models being developed for vision, for beyond vision and language, so that we can have, for example, pair underrepresented modality with those interpretable modalities, so that can help us to do more interpretable machine learning. And here is an example of the data resources that we have identified in our perspective paper. To show some examples, for example, here for this particular data set, they are primarily a text data set, but we can view them as multimodal by looking at the subcategories of the text in terms of a chat history and surveys. And in this ERA5, primarily they are spatial temporal data, and we can also view subtypes in temperature, humidity, and wind as a different modality. And finally, we have talk about deployment-centric workflow. Is important to engage the stakeholder very early on and have more extensive interdisciplinary collaboration. So it's important to integrate stakeholder input across our life cycle and develop more cross-disciplinary standards, because nowadays, I think discipline boundaries are blurring, and we should focus more on the data modality so that we can have cross-discipline standards for data modality. And we also need to consider how to have, for example, adaptive strategy so that it can make workflow adaptation more easier, more acceptable for people who are comfortable or more familiar with their existing workflows. And for detailed recommendation, you can refer to our perspective paper. And within our team, we have also contributed to the bigger ecosystem. We have developed a software library called PyKale. It's knowledge-aware machine learning for multimodal learning. And it is one of the 4 multimodal AI libraries in the PyTorch ecosystem, with the other 3 from Meta, NVIDIA, and Microsoft. And ours is the only one from academia, and also the other 3 focus on multimodal models, and we more focusing on the training, more as intermediate bridging library for existing models. We also, through developing our community, we also obtained £1.8 million from the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council of the UK to develop this UK open multimodal AI network. And we aiming to build more diverse and interdisciplinary networks and create more knowledge exchange platform and help us to identify and fund with about £1 million of some of the key focus areas of potential high impact. And being deployment-centric, we hope to encourage and grow more engagement with industry and policymakers, because industry are born to be deployment-centric. So in order to have more deployment-centric development, we want to engage with industry more and have their perspectives. For example, understanding of the constraints and how to develop, consider user needs and so on. And we also want to consider more sustainability, because we are aware that many projects are very short-lived and many data sets are collected, but they are not fully leveraged. And we want to promote more sustainable development so that we can better leverage and utilize the resources. And we want to also develop training resources to enhance our research capability and provide training materials. So in particularly in multimodal AI. And through that framework and this network, we have formulated this new initiative called Open Multimodal AI Benchmark. It's a funding call with the first round. We are receiving the full applications in 2 weeks' time, and we will make the decision in December 2020 this year. And we will have another 2 rounds. So the objective is we want to create and enrich our open ecosystem, and we want to reach and bring people together from multiple disciplines to collaborate. As I mentioned, we want to reuse and leverage what's over there. We particularly encourage people to look at the data that we have already collected, those software we have already built, but that we are not connected or putting together. And we want to, those will be the projects that we will prioritize to fund. And we emphasize the deployment-centric theme, and we want our project to consider the constraints in deployment. And this is a community-driven effort, and we will be highly coordinated across multiple projects. And we will build our shared infrastructure so that there will be more shared software that can be used and reused across multi-projects on GitHub. So another project that our team has been involved is called Cancer Data-Driven Detection. This is a £10 million program led by University of Cambridge, funded by multiple funding sources. And we want to advance our capability of prevent cancers and particularly detect cancer early and diagnose cancer early, and also consider to develop our technology to enhance equity. And we have bring together 30 plus researchers and co-Is from 20 plus institutions, and we will bring together data resources from electronic health record and administrative data, and also cancer data such as multi-omics, epidemiology data, and develop advanced analytic frameworks and software, open source libraries, and build a strong partnership to achieve our objectives here. So that is basically what I want to cover in this talk about our deployment-centric multimodal AI. We can see that multimodal data can provide a richer and more complete context to our real-world problem. And generative AI can provide solutions and creativity to many of the challenges in multimodal AI. And with our deployment-centric design, we can ensure that our effort, our talents, our resources are put together to generate more real-world impact so that it can bring benefits to our wider community and eventually ourselves. And this is really a great community effort, not just the work of our own team in Sheffield, but a very diverse and broad community from many different disciplines. So this is a workshop we had in September where we have bring together many different experts who to discuss the directions we want to pursue and share their experiences. And we will also have online events. And if you are interested in our work, and you can follow our LinkedIn and visit our website, where we will have future events and works to be shared with the broader community. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, Greg, again for providing this platform. I can see you have many like multidisciplinary talks hosted in the past. If there are time, I think we can take some questions.
Well, absolutely. Thank you very much. Well, let me ask one question. In terms of like, I mean, you mentioned interpretability, which I mean, you keep kind of poking at it from different sides of having all the different stakeholders understand what the model is doing, and it seems to connect very much to multimodality, because interpretability seems to be a form for connecting modalities and fields to each other, because there is a kind of a low-dimensional embedding from one to the other. I guess, what is that? What's the role of that, and how does that fit in this community kind of effort?
I think that's a very, very interesting and important part, right? So as you mentioned, that different. I think interpretability itself is not something like accuracy. I think interpretability means different things to different people, right? So it means one thing to you and to the public and to clinicians. They all means slightly differently. Therefore, it is sometimes we need to understand those differences and also try to standardize by bringing people together. Maybe define different layers of interpretability, and also more important is how to quantify interpretability, right? So I think interpretability is something very difficult to work on and to measure the progress. For example, in how much progress you have made, right? So accuracy is very easy. You have benchmark. We know, like when deep learning wins, we know it improves. When AlphaFold, we know the problem is solved. But interpretability is something very difficult to quantify and define. And because of that, I think we do need to bring people together, particularly I think social science. I think social science people are a community that we think we definitely need. Because I think interpretability is something more social, right? So I think it's not that. I think social science people they may be able to help us to craft some interesting and more quantifiable metrics so that we can bridge our interpretability. And talking about interpretability, that also comes to the importance of bridging the modality, right? Because interpretation mostly is in form of text, right? So that's also why I think when we mentioned about the future modalities, right? So I think text and language, right? So this modality is highly interpretable because eventually our interpretation will be presented as form of text. So how to use this modality to bridge different modalities that are, as we mentioned, that are more complex. Very complex thing, right? So and also here, right? So about the complex output, right? So how to translate some context nowadays, I think it's much more promising because we have powerful tools help us to describe, even, for example, nature research assistant. I give a figure, it can basically describe it using some text, right? So summarize the key information over there. How we can, I think nowadays it's much more possible to bridge the gap in interpretation by have this multimodal capability, and you can have one modality and translate into more accessible either vision or text modalities, so that they can be more easily understandable by multiple stakeholders.
So, I mean, I'm going to poke on this because I think you're in a very good position to think about this. I mean, it seems like if interpretability is in the eye of the beholder is a bit tricky, because then it's very easy to just say it's now text, it's short paragraph, go. But it seems like there's a quantitative component to it, where if you have a domain expert or a model from one domain, interacting with that thing means that other domains have to be compressed in a pretty simplified format to capture their key dynamics that, kind of cross domains, right? So to what extent can you leverage this multimodality to say that the way to compress my dynamics is this, such that it's understandable to you? Because it seems like interpretability and multi-domain alignment are roughly the same thing.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's difficult to answer, right? So just to share some of the conversations with social scientists, right? So I think when they quantify things, they have some kind of studies, right? Like a Delphi study, like observing people, and it's really hard. It may be another paper, right? So that we can work on. It's a bit difficult. Yeah, I may not be able to go into depth, but I think that's a very good question to pose to the community, to continuously consider these important aspects of AI and continue the discussion and explorations in this direction, so that we can help us to bring AI closer to our community and the society.
Okay, that makes sense. And then maybe one last one. You bring up a bunch of data sets that just happen to be aligned with each other. I mean, like Arrow 5 would be a good example. Many modalities that they happen to have in the same simulation, so it's available. But it seems difficult to just spontaneously collect data that just is aligned. So how do you, and actually, let me give you the hardest example that I think is where the breakthroughs might happen. There's a lot of historical data that was never aligned with our current data, but describes the same phenomenon, but it's not aligned at all. It just is the same phenomenon. So how do you create multimodal data sets, especially where it's like radically different sources, but the dynamics being described are the same?
Yeah. Well, that's really why we still have our job, right? So
right.
Basically the research challenge, right? So that's good that we still have open challenges, right? So about cross-modality alignment, right? So I think that is not unique. I think because many historical data, they didn't really keep a proper record, right? Even currently, I think, of whatever reasons, I think data are not, well, it's the quality of the data, right? So they didn't really keep all the necessary information for alignment, but I think multimodality make it slightly easier, right? So it's just like I mentioned, when police try to catch a criminal, they try to collect multiple pieces of quite different evidence of different nature, right? So because the same piece of information, you collect multiple, like a fingerprint, you collect 100, 100, it doesn't help you much. But in addition of fingerprint, you can collect some voice information, you can collect some gait information, right? So those kind of additional modality can really help you to pin down and to help you to be more robust and solve some of the challenges. So therefore, I do think like multimodal AI is the future, and we hope that some of the exciting challenges and, like you said, those kind of very open problems can be solved progressively over the next few years.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. It was a fascinating talk.
Thank you, Greg, for the opportunity, and thank you to all the audience who has been joining us.